Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Elias Redstone. I'm the Artistic Director of Photo 2022 International Festival of Photography here in Melbourne. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Great Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land on which I live and work. I'd also like to honor the rich and diverse Indigenous cultures across what is now called Australia. For over 60,000 years, Indigenous arts and culture have thrived on this sacred land, and we honor elders and cultural leaders, past and present. So I'm about to welcome our speaker today, Paul Sepuya. Paul is an artist working in photography whose projects weave together histories and possibilities of portraiture, queer and homoerotic networks of production and collaboration, and material and conceptual potential of Blackness at the heart of the medium. His interests also include queer literary modernism, questions of artistic responsibility, and care regarding representation and refusal. His work is in the permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Guggenheim Museum, the Getty Museum, the International Center for Photography, and so many more. And recent museum exhibitions include a project for the 2019 Whitney Biennial and Being New Photography 2018 at the Museum of Modern Art. We're absolutely delighted to be presenting a solo exhibition of Paul's work at the Center for Contemporary Photography for Photo 2022. And now let me welcome Paul. Good evening.
Hello. Good evening. I think it's daytime, afternoon.
It is. We've just gone midday here in Melbourne. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to be handing over to you to give a talk about your work and introduce some of the works that people will be able to see here in Melbourne in just a couple of weeks. In the meantime, if anyone is watching and would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function on Zoom and we will get to the questions towards the end. I'll join Paul later to go through some questions and to discuss the work in more detail. So Paul, over to you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for the introduction and for having me. And I hope everyone is well out there. It's always interesting on these Zooms where we can't see the audience. So I hope there will be some questions and conversation afterwards. Okay, so I'm giving a presentation sort of as an introduction to the work. I wanted to definitely focus on the the work that's going to be on view there. But rather than just talking about those pictures, what I'm actually going to do is kind of go through different elements in the work so that I hope then when the show is up, there'll be more of an opportunity to spend time with the work rather than me having explained them. So yes. Anyway, so I just wanted to begin with some prior installation views, just to kind of get a sense of how some recent works have been presented and a sense of scale, because photography, we tend to be just looking at photographs on screens and kind of unmoored from the viewing relationship in terms of the gallery and space. So here are just a few things from the show in Chicago last year. And we can talk, I believe we'll talk more in the Q&A about kind of like thinking about how exhibitions sort of come together. Here's various works. We see some works here that are, yeah, I'm speaking in an international audience. So I don't know how to translate measurements from inches. So these large ones are 50 by 75 inches. And these medium-sized ones are 40 by 60 inches. And these works here are 34 by 51. And I describe these sizes because, and this, I guess, yeah, maybe I'll just save this for the Q&A. There's various relationships between what is depicted in any given photograph. Now, these rules aren't totally strict in a sense, but there's often a relationship between depicting approximately 1-to-1 scale, what may be in front of the camera or on the surface of the mirror or in non-reflective space. And I'll get more into how this works. But so, for example, the portraits here of Anthony and Christopher, they are approximately life size at this scale of 34 by 51. And in this image here, where we have, this is made in a mirror, this is fragments that are obstructing the mirror. This is an arm that is in non-reflected space. This is the back of that arm and shoulder in reflected space. I hope all this will start to make sense later. But that this element, that this like portion of this limb that is entering into the image is then at a 1-to-1. Okay. We'll get more into that. Some references and things, and I just want to kind of give a sense of. So there's tends to be a lot of elements in terms of not only references, but I think that very much connects to the way in which quote unquote collage works in my pictures. There aren't that as many sort of quote unquote collage images in this show, but they are that content is very important. Anyways, this is actually a page from an exhibition catalog that was for a show at the New Museum in New York, and the curators asked each contributing artist to include a spread that would tie into genealogies, artistic genealogies, all these sorts of things. But anyways, I just wanted to show this because it presents this text that is overlain on it. Comes from these Google documents. This Google document that I keep is sort of like a working space for all of these, notes, references, things that I write down after conversations with friends, citations from things. That's sort of what's overlaid. And then here we see, it's just a snapshot of a cork wall in my studio where there's things pinned, and we kind of see all the various things that I might be thinking of in any given moment. And this was in the summer of 2017. So you can see, kind of looking at here, I'm looking at I believe this is a Judy Dater photograph here. We have like a fragment, a film still from an Annie Lennox music video. We have Hans Brader work here. We have reproductions of European of Africans, these paintings of Moorish heads. We have Alice Neal, fragment of an Alice painting. We have of my own friends. This is the back of my friend Michael's head. Here's an image that a friend sent me that was made in response, kind of like inspired by an image that I had sent him. Sort of all these things are kind of colliding, and that all leads up to this idea of like studio time, in which multiple instances, not only of my own work and the things that come into it and are influenced by it, or no matter sort of where they are originally grounded in the studio, everything is simultaneous. And so I'm kind of like moving across so many things. I'm throwing out Manet's Olympia here in terms of thinking about, I'm often thinking about painting, the history of painting, the history of representation, and how Black subjects, Black figures are used compositionally as well as conceptually. Thinking about the way in which, and I forget to do this before every time I do a talk, writing down, so I remember this woman's name, the woman who's bearing the flowers, who is not a servant, she's not an attendant, she is actually like the well-known central figure who was recognized as a courtesan in mid-19th century Paris. She was a florist, she was an entrepreneur. So in a sense, she is depicted delivering her own product here. And I'm interested in the way in which her figure in space kind of surrounds, she kind of extends into the space in this image, and thinking about that merging into and out of these materials and these fabrics, which is something that you'll see a lot in my work, how that's sort of an interesting position that I think of, that's one of of power and manipulation, rather than the way it's been described historically as a marginalized position. I'm thinking a lot about point perspective staging. There's a part where I'm talking about the studio as stage. This is a George Platline's image from these photographs he made for this production in 1934 of an all-Black opera called Four Saints and Three Acts. And just these sort of like internal loops that are happening here, the overall scene, this sort of like moment where this figure is engaged in sort of seeing herself, but also performing for this camera here, but also sort of like the absurd nature of this, that they're using a lace, a translucent lace, rather than a full dark cloth in order to stage or to see the image. And also thinking about the ways in which seeing and being seen in a sort of like reflexive process is integral to the making of work. There's a whole story behind this image, this Jean Weisinger image, seeing myself through Alice Walker's eyes. But the thing I'm interested in it is that in this moment where Weisinger asks Alice Walker to sit for a portrait in this body of work of lesbian and bisexual women that she was making in the 1970s and early 80s, is that Alice Walker, who's known as a writer, flips the script on Weisinger, and Weisinger becomes a subject for Alice Walker, and then that exchange becomes sort of this kernel for Weisinger continuing to pursue her work. So this way in which there's kind of like a collaboration and an interdependence that's at the center of kind of looking. Thinking about artists like Barbara Probst, and again, this idea of sight lines, of making visible, like in these works, in this body of work called Exposures that she has, where it's simply, I chose this one, she has this countless wonderful images of hers, but where by the placement of two cameras side by side, two subjects, and each subject looking at a different lens, makes visible what is typically that space that is typically meant to disappear in photography, which is point perspective. And then thinking about that also in terms of reasserting control or agency in image making, and thinking about Rotimi Fani-Kayode as a contemporary of Robert Mapplethorpe, was for far too long overshadowed by Mapplethorpe and the literal shadow that Mapplethorpe's work casts, but this idea of these images made by his contemporaries that acknowledge, there's many Mapplethorpe works that are acknowledging not only Fani-Kayode, but also, Peter Hujar or, various other people, but Fani-Kayode playing off of this, acknowledging, implicating the viewer, at the same time denying the object of Mapplethorpe's desire. And so all of this leads into going back to an image of mine here, which is something that was unlike the spread from the exhibition catalog, a work that I did make that was just thinking about many of these references that come together. And I could name all of these, but maybe if someone wants to know more, we can come back, just ask me. Okay, and then thinking about just the darkroom as the place where my relationship to photography was formed, in learning analog photography in the 90s, in the mid and late 90s, and that as also an analog in terms of the relationship to sight and touch, and a kind of like foregrounded initial experience that then develops over time outside of that space. For example, experiencing the revealing of an image under this light, and being forever tied to it, even though that work goes out into the world of, let's say, exhibition or whatever it might be, but also thinking about that as an analogy or metaphor analogy, whichever part of language it is, that the dark room of like social, sexual, kind of like erotic experience is, and thinking about this idea again of these primary instances of touch, of feeling, of knowing how to navigate in this space, and kind of keeping that in mind while navigating the world on the sidewalk. Okay, so those are references. I'll just kind of get through some like recent portraits and things. So I just wanted to show some portraits because, and I mean, the work that's in the show, that's going to be opening the show, is sort of heavy on portraits and subjects. That's always been sort of an interesting balance to kind of put into work. And I'm always referencing, okay, we'll talk about it in the questions afterwards, but the relationship between portraits and other figurative works and then abstract looking works and collage works has always been kind of like an interesting challenge and opportunity just in the context of exhibition. So yeah, here are some recent portraits. It should be noted that in situations like this, I will, and I should go back and say the names of everyone. But you'll notice that the portraits, recent portraits, they're not titled for a subject's name, for my friends' names. All the subjects are friends. So this is a portrait of Christopher. This is a portrait of Akeem. This is a portrait of Emily. This is a portrait of Emerson. This is a double portrait of MPA and Guadalupe. And these earlier portraits, because I've sort of skipped over a whole, 5-6 years of early portrait work. It's always been a foundation of things, but I just wanted to jump back to this portrait of Katie from 2011, which is titled Her Name and Her Date. This was made in New York. I lived in New York from 2000 to 2014. And so the grounding for all of the kind of like social space for my work is from those formative years living there, from my undergrad studies to the next 11 years, just like living and working. And by 2011, this was probably the third or fourth time I had made portraits of Katie and her partner, who's now her husband, but 2011, you start to see this thing happening in portraits where they had gone beyond just my me photographing in my kitchen or my bedroom and this sort of like individual subjects to moving into a studio for the first time and this like mirroring happening. So this portrait of Katie is also including a working print of this portrait of Anthony. And so Tony is back there, and I was interested in sort of the mirroring of their figures. But then, so this is a whole other kind of thing of studio time, which we'll get into. But then I just wanted to jump ahead to this 2017 portrait of Katie at 5 months pregnant with her daughter, who's now 4 years old. Yeah, Scout Louise. So, when I began making the work, so when you, like I said, the subjects in my work are friends. I'm not photographing models or strangers. I did in the very beginning, for many reasons, I centered the work on people who I knew was getting to know or wanted to know. And so, Victor is one of the subjects, but like when I was making this early work, especially the work around 2004 to 2006, I had no idea that these friends, that those people would continue to be in the work across various projects. So like this image here is much more is in the related bodies of work to what you will see in the show there in Melbourne. But this and this I don't believe, actually I'm so bad at remembering. I can't remember if this work is in the show or not, but I think it's just important. And I wanted to point out that bodies of work like grow and change, and I'm at the same time interested in the ways in which these friendships kind of carry across them. Another important part of the work that has been always kind of working with rather than against outtakes and imperfections and sort of like mistakes and boredom. Like a lot of the photographs of the studio, which are such a main subject of current work, came out of, me initially thinking of the studio as like, okay, this is the place I'm going to photograph. This was also the time when I had a first residency experiences where I could have a space, fill it up, and not be worried about having to clean it up all the time. And I initially thought of it as, okay, I'd make photographs when I can you know, arrange with a friend to come up and sit for a portrait, and then, or I make a particular arrangement. But there was all this, you know, 95% of the time in the studio is just boredom. It's just me by myself when I'm there, or back then. So these things that I was just taking as just like, oh, observing things, or sometimes I'd be photographing. And this went back to when I was in the physical darkroom, just photographing on the walls, or like on the light boards where you like check the color balance of your prints. I would sometimes just take snapshots of like fragments arranged together, just to be like, oh, I was working all of this at one time. So like those cork boards I showed earlier, that other one, that came out of me returning to a lot of things that I thought of as outtakes. That this was just like me looking at the studio that I was in Harlem, New York on March 2nd, 2011. And then later on realized that those were works themselves. The studio became this space. Also working in a way where, you know, between 2011 and 2014, I didn't have access to a studio space, and I really couldn't afford to print work, to, you know, buy film, go to the darkroom, make prints, all of that stuff that I was so used to. And so that was around the time I got a digital camera for the first time and just started taking much more free snapshots, formal images, but also things, and also incorporating, you know, I think maybe by 2012 or 2013, I'd gotten an iPhone, you know, but there was like, you know, cell phone images. I should say that all the prior work I was shooting was on medium format, Mamiya RZ67. And by the time by 2011, like that portrait of Katie I showed you, I started shooting digitally. But what that allowed me to do was to free up and just sort of, I got a $99, I don't know what that translates to currency. It's a very affordable color laser printer that I just stuffed under my bed in Brooklyn, and it allowed me to just print things out. I had a background in zine making also before this. So this idea of working with just kind of like unfinished material is also what led into how I work with the studio right now. It was returning to the freedom that zines kind of like allowed. It gave a space for organizing and sequencing things. By 2013, 2014, I began, I guess what I should say is, in working outside of a studio space, these just bundles that like I'd carry in my backpack or tote bags, or would sit on my desk, and I would just binder clip them together, those became my studio. And so this image that was made November 21st, and I believe this is actually 2013, was a moment when my friend Brendan Fernandez had gone on a residency, let me use his studio for a few weeks. And this was these moments where I could unfurl all this stuff that I had just been printing out. And so I would photograph these, again, initially just as like notes, and then I returned later to them as works. But these things that I was bundling and binder clipping, I eventually started using formalizing by sending them off to a bookbinder that I've been collaborating with, and she has been binding them into volumes of this loose material. And I'll explain why this stuff is more important later with the current stuff you see. Yeah, here, and this project is called Some Recent Pictures. It just kind of holds all sorts of formal, informal things, you know, but it was this way of always returning to that space that kind of gave me this way of working that I've continued in my studio now. So this is just like an outtake that was made at the beginning of grad school. I went back to grad school in 2014, came back to Los Angeles, and I had a studio for the first time, and I carried with me a bunch of these just like outtakes fragments and things. And so I just started pinning them up in my studio as a way of like, oh, I can make arrangements of them, and then I can make photographs that will sort of try to resolve them, and then I can put them into those clipped bundles and then have them bound. And just, I still don't know what that work will become, but this is what preceded the working on the mirror. And so here you see this sort of thing starting in non-reflected space, but you see kind of what started in 2011 by like including not only maybe the things that I'm looking at, but also the context of time. You know, it's very grad school. Like I'm sure there were some fellow, you know, grad students that had some beers like earlier that day, you know, everything is just left around, orange peels, all this stuff. But that gets more formalized at this point where I started bringing in So rather than this like corkboard, and this is probably, God, I've traveled with so many things for so long. This is probably the corkboard that I photographed the thing for the museum like years later. I replaced these with mirrors. I just went to a hardware store and started buying mirrors that I could fit in my car, and I would prop them up against the wall, put my camera in front of them while making arrangements on them. And I started making images like this. So the reflected space is the wall behind, or I mean, the wall opposite the mirror, behind the camera. So what you're seeing here is fragments of laser prints from outtakes, from snapshots, from unresolved images that were placed on the surface of the mirror. And then this space is all the reflected space behind it. You see the wall in the studio ended. That's why you have this like dark space up here. I hope this all makes sense. We can come back to it later. A clue to the titles though is that each one, so J and O as the initials for my friend Joseph Osmundson, who was the subject of this portrait, so to speak, or this study that was made. Kind of an exchange refers to the fact that like over the days of sort of making this arrangement, I was sort of sending him images back and forth. And the 4 figures refers to, there's 4 other figures included in this, or other people that this is tied to for me. I kind of, even though they are not him, completed this. This element with this table and this arm, this is my friend Shaban's table, and this is my friend Theodore sitting at her table. So this is 2 figures. This is a fragment of an embrace between my friends David Christopher and Felix. And so you have these, and this is a portion of David Christopher's body. So you kind of have these collective or fragmented images that I was trying to pull together into one frame. But moving forward, and there's many reasons, too much to get into right now about why I kind of moved on from that kind of more rigid type of thing, but I've continued to use a more like cutting and tearing of individual like laser print tests in collages that I make. So these are some collages that I make. The content from these just pulls from, like, this is some images made on the dance floor. Oh, it's funny, this is actually that same friend. This is the two friends. I hadn't even thought about this when I put this slideshow together, that these subjects here, that this image made in 2015, that these are those 2 subjects 3 years later that I made one night on a dance floor in Brooklyn. So this sort of like fragmentation comes in this just kind of fun space of collage. And this is like what my studio looks like when I'm making all of the mirror collages, which I will get to. Like you can see, I'm no longer using the specifics of the color laser printer and just the standard paper size. I'm printing things out on this larger, like an inkjet, very lightweight paper that I can easily cut, tear into shapes and things. And this is the material that is now that gets arranged on the surfaces of mirrors. Okay, so this is what leads into these collage photographs, which are actually, I call them mirror studies. This is these sort of like transitional ones where we have these like our personal snapshot archives that are like whole images, including the sort of like drapery, which I'll get into. But that, that moves more into these where I'm using larger fragments and I'm more sort of like intentionally, or at least less mechanically cutting and fragmenting them. I'm going to try to just go through these pretty quickly so we have time for yeah, I can get more into them. Okay. Sorry, one moment. Something just popped up on my computer. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so then we get into these sort of like darkroom mirror series, and these ones kind of like start to really precede what we see. So I've been making these works in these mirrors, and I've been interested in both the mirror perpendicular and the mirror at an angle that allows you to be seen, or to see but not see your own reflection. Like this is a turned mirror. But in all of these mirrors, because I'm working on the surface or I'm using them as backdrops for photographing friends, there's these smudges accumulating in them. And this was just sort of like an accidental thing that just pops up in various ways. Like the black of the reflector here, you start to see a little bit of a smudge. They become more, they're more visible in the physical prints, or images like these where, you know, this is a fragment of actually a portion of my leg through some pants that I'm wearing. You know, that's what this black fabric is, and that's obscuring the reflection of the camera. But we see here the black of the tripod, you know, the camera sort of like on its side. You start to see the smudges. These are my fingerprints and other things left behind. And I wasn't really like, I didn't really know what to do with that for a while until I started thinking about the fact that there was all this latent traces of material on the surface of the mirror that was rendered invisible until something black material, which could be my body, which could be these black velvets and fabrics that I was using, provided a ground into which all of this sort of like, and this idea of latency is so built into photography. I found it, I was just like sort of very compelled with it, but also conceptually, it was like this interesting way. And so I began rather than draping using the fabrics as backdrops, constructing dark cloths over the mirror, and then going inside enough to be able to have a little bit of light come in, and then so that I could get the surface visible, and sort of using this as a way to make this visible. And this is where, again, this idea, this language of the dark room and the dark room starts emerging. But again, I was thinking about like black material, blackness as a key core for a core element of visibility that kind of like flips a sort of internalized hierarchy. And then it wasn't until a friend asked me how I was making those works, and if you could be in one, and I was like, I don't know, this is just me in them. But I made a portrait of him, and then I was trying to make images in this space, and it just didn't work until this image where I was like, oh, actually just go outside of it and just pull back a curtain. And I was thinking about this sort of like reversal of Manet, but this was the one successful image, I think. And it opened up this whole idea of like, oh, that is a performative space. And it's really about there's this like closed loop inside these images made with the mirror. There's this sort of like, there's this beginning language around the dark room and the dark cloth, and like the potential, the erotic potential in that. And then suddenly, by introducing someone on the outside wanting to come in, it just like, I was like, oh, I can use the double language. Like literally I can just be doing both of them, just go all the way. And so this is what led to this idea of making these, trying to make these images that are like very, in a sense, rational and conceptual, but also that teeter on this edge of or surpass excess. And the sort of, and the tension of kind of making these, like, I sort of think of this one as kind of like a Ouija board image, right? It's like thinking about how difficult it is to keep the Ouija board thing still, but it's a camera, and it's like 3 bodies. So, you know, this leads to this idea, there's so much of that stuff and we can get to it, but this idea of like these entangled cameras, which comes from this whole way in which I've always been thinking not just about portraiture as being like me just looking out at individual people, but more in a horizontal set of relationships. And so I wanted to show this one. This is me, you know, sitting at a request for a friend here, and then I made an image of him. Kind of goes back to the Alice Walker, Jane Weisinger image. But anyways, I began thinking about this space that I was creating and the fact that most of my friends are also artists. And so I began asking them to bring their cameras and make images with me in these. I would not direct their images. It was interesting when I first showed this work in a show in 2018, and someone who was reviewing it described my friend James Garcia here as my assistant setting up my camera. And I was like, that's an interesting interpretation of this, where you factually see 2 cameras and 2 people holding 2 very different cameras. And if you could tell anything about images, this is like he is working with a Rolleiflex camera, and which is a square format. You know, everything about this, you can see that there's another person making images, and that the image that you see is not those. But I was holding on to this idea and kind of continuing this like opening up of this space. This is an image made with my friend who's a photographer, Giancarlo Montes Santangelo. And these ones that are kind of called camera lessons here with Ariel Goldberg, who's an old friend, where I'm instructing them on how to use one of my older cameras, a similar one with a friend, Clay Kerrigan here. And so I was like interested in these multiple, you know, they're in a sense, they're like the reverse of those Barbara Probst that I was so kind of like inspired by. And that led to this idea of, because the question of authorship, and I think this people were very unsure in a way, is so it's very weird how the reception of images go, especially when there's this idea of like, which one should I be valuing? It led to this presentation that I put together for the Whitney Biennial in 2019 at the Whitney Museum of American Art. And, oh, I should be better on time. Okay. And so that presentation, which many people, many viewers to the museum thought was a solo presentation of my own work, was actually not. There was only one image of my own making in here. And what is presented is, so for example, this is another image made with a friend, artist A.L. Steiner. The image that we show here is one that we made together. So this is a collaborative image, duo authored, that she directed. She wanted this image of herself at this moment in her life. This is an image that is a portrait of me that James Garcia made. That is an image from that camera that previously someone had described as having no agency. This is the image that Clay Kerrigan made in the camera lesson of me instructing him with the camera. Same with Ariel. This is one of the few ones that was quote unquote my image, being, because you see the two cameras here and we included, you know, both. These are the images that Giancarlo Montes Santangelo, maybe I can zoom in. So you can see like, whereas in the, oops, let me go back. So I was trying to zoom in, but it just made things confusing. So you can see like, he was photographing the space around us, that I'm interested in this like entanglement, but also the images going in very different ways. But that leads to finally one of the final elements that leads to the show with y'all there, is this show that I did that was really inspired by outtakes, called A Conversation Around Pictures, that was in Los Angeles. And it opened, I mean, I was so thankful that it went up. We installed it the week that things were really getting serious with COVID, but no one knew what was going to happen really. And then the opening was the day in which California, which was the first state in the US to completely shut down. So it was kind of this show that never happened, but it was inspired by this image that was like it sat for several years. The date is actually incorrect. This is actually, the date of this is 2017. I need to correct this slide, but it was an outtake of my friend Yasser as I was trying to readjust my camera, and he was just taking a selfie to go right onto Instagram or whatever. And I loved that in all these images of mine that are made in this enclosed space of the mirror and the camera, that these, in looking at them later on, that those screens kind of provided a way out. So like that George Platt Lyons image of the 1934 opera, where you have these like nested loops. Like I was interested in these loops, but also this thing that pointed out, and also the fact that like I didn't show this work until 2020, and yet the images that Yasser had made would have already circulated for 3 years prior, if you knew how to find him, or, you know. And so I came to these. This is one with Dicko Chen. Dicko was another friend whose work I presented. We presented at the Whitney Biennial, but here we have another one of these images. I was just really fascinated with this space. And again, this idea of, so it, you know, it goes from this kind of like internal kind of like darkroom space that allows for a type of thing to be seen, kind of expanded then into a social space that was about, that is more focused on this idea of like the language of the kind of generative process in the photographer's darkroom, and the generative like intersection of social, creative, and sexual play in the other kind of darkroom, and then expanded into kind of like these structures around friendship and relationships. And so I believe this one is in the show too, fingers crossed. Always things behind the scenes, another one. These, I'm also going back to painting and thinking about like late 18th century Enlightenment paintings, and there's, you know, this like Diderot and like Michael Fried ideas of absorption, and these images where you have subjects so engaged in the task that you're both beholding an image, but you're wholly disregarded, or yeah, we can get into that if someone has questions. And so this leads to like the works that are going to be in the current show, the other works. And those kind of if there is some idea of them, it's like maybe expanding this idea that like the idea of the studio as a stage, kind of, it moves across all these kind of performative elements. Again, so I'm going to show these images. I'm not going to explain, I'm not going to break these apart, but I'm hoping that everything that I've presented kind of allows for a deeper understanding of them when you do see them. So here, maybe this is the one that I will sort of explain, the studio work, which is one of the, lately I've been making more horizontal works, but I wanted one that was like of the studio. The only physically present body is my body here, kind of like turning and aiming this mirror that's on a mobile flat that at its angle both reflects what is off of this, which is out of the view of this camera. It brings into it this fragment of a double portrait of me and my friend John, but also it reflects this black velvet, which makes visible all of the smudges and the traces on this mirror. We have a fragment, here's going back to the working print, test print strip of that image of Victor. Here, this black velvet that's hanging also makes visible these sort of smudges, these body prints that are left on the surface of this first mirror that we're seeing. Oops, here's the camera that's taking that image. We see a seam between the two large mirrors. And then here we have a bench that's actually oh wait, I was gonna say that was a non-reflective space, but actually that is, we don't see the mirror in between the camera and the mirror. We're actually looking at the reflection of this bench on the side. So this kind of holds all those things. And in the last minute, I'm just gonna kind of go through the works that you'll see. And as I'm going through these, maybe a nice transition would be to open it up to questions or conversation.
Paul, thank you. It's such a pleasure to hear you talk about your work, and thank you for sharing so many insights. It's a great time to start asking some questions. We have got a couple of questions in for the audience. If people would like to ask Paul a question, please use the Q&A function. Before we get to those, I thought I'd start a conversation around community in your work. And it's so nice, you know, currently seeing some of your friends and collaborators on screen. I'm really pleased that you brought up the Whitney exhibition, the Whitney Biennial, and that real generosity of spirit of inviting your friends in, not just as subjects, but also as fellow artists, and putting them forward. You often return to the same subjects, the same friends and collaborators in your work. And in your book that was published by Aperture, that I believe is back in print now, I urge you to get a copy. The text even written by authors that have also been subjects of your work. So this whole sort of cyclical relationship that you have, this community that you're building around your work. why for you was community so important, and so important to make that visible as an artist? Because so many artists keep that hidden, but it is very present in your work and the way that you create and share it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I didn't show the earliest portraits, and I always kind of say I started making actual portraits around 2005. Before that, I was making images of people. They were the kind of thing that, you put a flyer on an art school bulletin board or like on a message board, and it's like, I've got this project, I need someone to sit for me. Subjects tend to be interchangeable. I'm trying to kind of like map an idea onto a model, and then, I found myself getting very bored with that work. And I think part of it was just kind of like, after undergrad, being like, I need to let go of all this like bullshit that I was trying to do to excuse making images. Part of it was about being honest. I was like, why did I pick up a camera when I was 15 years old? I picked it up because I wanted to get to know people. And it was like a way to kind of break out of being like really sort of like shy. And I was like the high school photographer. And so after undergrad, and I was like, okay, I just kind of lost interest in looking at pictures if I didn't know the person, or if there wasn't an ongoing interest. So it's also important to say I was making portraits of family and extended family in Louisiana and Denmark, particularly. And it was also about getting to know people. And so the first portraits, these people who've now, many of them who've remained in the work, and I'm gonna actually stop share so we can just, that's better. I can always pull up images if someone's interested. So it became this thing of realizing, okay, I wanna be honest about why I was making images of people. It wasn't to just use them interchangeably, but it was about like, it was like an encounter to get to sit down with someone I knew, to get to know someone who I was curious about, or reconnect with someone who I'd lost touch with. And also acknowledging in like these, early 20s, like Brooklyn and New York thing where everyone was getting to these spaces. We were saying just gay spaces back then, that all of these sorts of like comings together, no matter how they would end up, were based around curiosity, flirtation, and attraction. So I just made everything as like on the level, just being like, and the work was very tame. I was just like, my friends and I, we were just sitting on the edge of the kitchen table or in my bedroom, and we would just like maybe take a shirt off and take a picture. But I wanted there in the crop this suggestion that there was more. And so anyways, I wanted to foreground in intimacy, but the main thing has been that there's always a mutual an ongoing and dynamic like interest on both sides in the work. And it's really interesting to continue to make work with friends and build off of things, and also the ways in which people know each other. I'm always, yeah. Anyways, so I guess maybe it's, you were asking earlier about like inclusion of one of the portraits, and my friend Zen is in one of the portraits, who I met here, but is from Melbourne, and I thought was still going to be in Melbourne at the time the show was up. But I've always liked like, oh, where's the show going to be? I had a show in, let's say, Minneapolis, and so I put my portrait of my friend Dominic in it because I was like, oh, I would love that his mom could go see it. Or when I had a show in Houston, I put my friend Christopher was in it, and I love that his mom could go. I always like to have a way in which someone there's always another entrance into the work. That's really fun. But Zen moved to Canberra. His family moved there during the last year, so he's not at the show.
Well, hopefully he'll be able to jump on a plane down here and see it. We'd very much welcome him, and also to see him on the wall of the gallery. I think a lot of what you're saying also relates to the importance of kind of chosen family, especially for queer communities that move around a lot, that establish themselves in urban spaces, and And that comes through in your work, and especially that connection that you make back, and make clear that, you know, that the dark rooms of spaces of sexual experience and desire also relate to community and connection, and can also be spaces where friendships are formed as much as anything else. This brings us nicely on to a question by Carl Halliday, who is a curator and photographer based here in Melbourne. He precedes it by expressing his admiration for your work, and looks forward to seeing the exhibition. He says, one thing I find interesting about your portraits is that though the word portraiture derives from Latin meaning to expose, your portraits are as much about what is hidden. I'm reminded of Sontag's idea of the erotic image, where the object of desire is not directly given, but implied beyond the frame. What is the object of desire in your work?
Oh, that's such a good question. I would say the object of desire is, I mean, if there is an object of desire or a desiring, a viewer with desire, a desiring, what, like, how would Roland Barthes say it? I mean, I hate talking about Barthes and photography, but like maybe only a lover's discourse is the only actual relevant thing. But the amorous you know, if there's a desiring subject, that's like up to the subject. But I mean, if I just talk about the work from this darkroom series and on, the object of desire has been found and resolved in the making of the work, and there's no consideration for the viewer, which sounds harsh, but the thing I'm really interested in is the fact that, like, you know, and this was kind of getting to this idea of how the darkroom images could hopefully do something interesting conceptual with photography, which was both by inverting the idea that at this being in a space of clarity and lucidity, everything would be revealed, that you would move into a space that privileges darkness and blackness as a material requirement for making things visible, but also acknowledging that, like, photography, I'm like not interested in this idea, this, like, you know, the whole psychoanalytic idea of like desire as a lack. I'm more interested in the idea of like photography is a technology that is a product of desire. And so what are the things that are desired? I'm thinking about like why there's a million Talbot photographs of the bust of Patroclus. It's like, why that one thing? Like that is something that means a particular thing in like a little silly Western European history. And it's like, well, why that thing? So anyways, I just wanted to kind of like tie together desiring position and a requirement for Blackness at the core of the medium. And so, but the thing is, in those mirror images, sorry, I'm like going in circles on this, but there's both like an exhibitionist and a view and a voyeuristic thing happening simultaneously. And because they meet in the making of the image, like whatever happens next is sort of like irrelevant to that like desire that was happening at that moment. And so that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in a subject perhaps being implicated by the apparatus or by the scene that's unfolding. And because of the way it's positioned for a viewer, it seems like you're like, oh, I should fall into this. I should be able to like connect into it. But then you realize you're looking at the surface of a mirror by those smudges. And then you realize, oh, okay, a mirror is supposed to incorporate it's supposed to physically incorporate your image into it. It's a dynamic thing, but this mirror is already sealed off. And so you're left in this position of figuring out your desire relationship or your social proximity to it, but you can never be in it formally. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm interested in terms of desire. I hope that makes sense, Carl.
I think it does. I'm going to jump to another question that follows on nicely from John Anselmi. He says, you've touched on friendship, community, and intimacy reflected in your works. Do you think there's also a thread of exploring your own identity?
I'm not interested in exploring anyone's identity in the work. There has never been a particular portrait or grouping of portraits or works that have ever attempted to like claim to defining or presenting a particular identity. I always have a hard time with like curatorial projects that's like portraits that tell us about queer people. Like, I'm utterly uninterested in those, and I don't mean to offend any curatorial like whatever. I just I'm not in, I mean, there's always the tangential aspects in which works can function. Like, in a certain sense, at any point making work within a particular community over a certain amount of time, it becomes a document of a particular, you know, place. And yes, one can look at depictions of subjects and attempt to ping identities onto them, and then maybe group them and say, okay, now we're presenting this. But the thing I'm interested in is structural, in terms of like when I was talking, like I'm interested structurally in what Blackness as a material can achieve in images. I'm interested in looking at the way in which queer desire has operated socially in refusing specific categories of relation that these spaces move from the flirtatious to the collaborative to the romantic to the erotic and back, that those two things structurally are what I'm interested in exploring. And on a practical level, you know, I'm interested in the ways in which subjects have been misidentified. People's race or ethnicity has been wildly misread, particularly the ways in which Asian and light skinned subjects get written as white, that fragments of other bodies of other Black or bodies that read as Black might be presumed to be mine. Yeah, I'm interested, you know, there's that. And there's also the fact that, like, even in terms of like gender and sexuality, those things change. Like, I have a, you know, like people's names, people's gender identities, people's, you know, people transition back. Like, it would be silly of me.
On that thread, those ideas around Blackness and race and skin. Your studio portraits, I sometimes think of them a bit almost like an architect that works with very specific materials. You kind of pair back these portraits to the set of the studio. There's the whiteness of the walls, perhaps the light gray of the floor, there's maybe a touch of wood in there with the bench, the curtain. It's very pared back, and there's not much variety going on there. The variety comes from the bodies. And often with the lack of clothing, the skin is radiant within that, and the subtleties of it, and the way that you capture skin, which, you know, historically we're known to capture Black skin in all its glory. It was always focused on white skin, but there's a real focus on skin and all those beautiful different shades and bodies and sizes. To what extent is that kind of, is the pared backness of everything else there to really just celebrate the body as a beautiful object in its own right, or to what degree was that incidental?
Oh yeah, I mean, no matter how much I attempt to make conceptual things or smart things, like, I just like making beautiful things. And so it's also, and so I think like wanting to make things that are just, in my opinion, beautiful, and making work that is that is more and more like very explicit in terms of like sexuality and performance, those are very hard things to do because they're just like shortcuts. And so I started using drapery because one of the things that I did in grad school was like, okay, I want to look at the histories of these genres that I'm working in. And so I started looking at the history of studio portraiture, and then looking at the history of photo studios, and looking at the elements that kind of tagged along from painter studios. And so fabric is one of those, and thinking about the way in which it's just sort of a gratuitous thing in a lot of paintings, but it's a way to show, it's like one of the easiest things to do, but it's one of the flashiest things to do. So I started using drapery for that purpose, in looking at like 1920s to 1940s, like American and European homoerotic photographs, and the type of elements like columns, plinths, fabrics, the sort of sheer things that like George Platt, I didn't show the other George Platt lines references, but those things that got used so that people would be like, this work looks like art. So it was like, they're the things that have always kind of surrounded bodies to be like, this is beautiful, But then I started like gathering fabric. The first fabric I used was blue. I started using the fabric because there was I didn't start using the fabric in grad school. I started paying attention to the fact that after they moved to my bedroom was bedsheet. I started thinking the room, that I just to my studio, or when I first had a studio, this residency in 2010, I brought those old bed sheets and just used them as backdrops. When I went over the Carrie and got to UCLA in 2014, I had been thinking about, and I had been photographing like many things that happen in grad school, go out and like think too hard about it. There was a student there who was making this like crazy epic sci-fi film thing, gold and blue and red fabric, and he was throwing it inside it because I was thinking like cheesy gay pinup photography, making those photos of it, and they were just so tacky. The color was awful. That one that I showed of the turned mirror and the gold fabric, the gold. So anyways, this is a roundabout way of getting to your question about like this way with this bodies look awful. I mean, a Charlesworth thing, or you're doing like some, maybe like a really kind of like punk Mark Morris sort of thing, where like you have these crazy. I'm not someone who manipulates in post-production to do, like what you see is what you get. All these crazy colors of fabrics, all these other crazy patterns looked terrible. So yes, I narrowed everything down so that in the images you would have a kind of continuous series of tones that would either refer to the walnut benches and the walnut frames that I use, and that first brown fabric, I have those match my skin. There are also the plywood benches in some of them. That's just like functional. And then the black velvet was looking at the history of black velvet specifically in photography, but also a space that I could merge into and out of. And everyone looks great. There's not, it's not like a weird undertone in skin, It also saves on a ton of crazy color balancing stuff. I don't know, there's practices about making sure things look good, and yeah, but I don't, yeah. Sorry. I
great.
can go on.
No, I've just got a quick question. But this conversation's too good. From Carl, actually, again. The audience often tangled as if in a dance. Have you explored moving images or live performance, or is it inspiration in your work?
I oh my God, I'm such a I'm like a I work in a area and my visit in the these constant conversations. Like, I mean, I don't hate, I love, and I love cinematography. I do not like working in time-based media, and I especially in terms of performance, anything dealing with sound or audio, will never touch it or go near it. I'm very interested in performance as it exists as an image. Like, so in one of those references that I didn't break down, there's like there's these stills from, or like press stills or whatever they're called, from like Fassbinder's Bitter Tears of Funk. A lot of his work is very interesting, the way in which becoming, especially that mural that's behind her, he's painting, and everything is just moving in front of the lid. I'm into that. Like, the reason why I have that Annie Lennox, Annie Lennox Money Can Buy It video, is one of the most brilliant artworks of all the anniversary. And her like in terms of image is, and there's also these references to it, and they're sort of scared of these portraits, the series of portraits of Nina Simone behind in her dressing room, dressed in this like royal Egyptian head, and sort of like all the sort of everything that she's sort of channeling in that. So I'm thinking about, yeah, dance, like Yvonne Rainer. There's so many things. I'm spending a lot of time thinking about working. I'm not interested in making work in those areas, but they're definitely inspiration. And I'm always thinking about, if you can locate it in the photographs, something that a friend remarked that I've mentioned in other artist talks. When Aspen Mays came into my studio and she was looking around, she's like, "I'm this, like, you never know in a particular photograph if it was the setup or if it was the event." Setting up condition. I did a show called The Conditions in 2019 at Team Gallery in New York, and it was called The Conditions, thinking about, okay, what are the elements that are set up in the space in order for things to those larger social conditions, in terms of like friendships and relationships and conversations. Both those things coming together allow for things to unfold. And so all of the images are made just randomly, not randomly. Oh, there's my cat. And yeah, and every image perhaps a still from a performance that was unfolding. Yeah. But those are really good questions, because I don't think anyone's ever asked it that specifically.
Right.
Before.
Well, we actually just got another question come in from Melbourne-based artist Hoda Afshar, whose exhibition Speak the Wind is also in Photo 2022.
Oh, cool.
And she says, "I wonder if your work's inspired by Frantz Fanon's black skin, white masks, in which he focuses on racism ideas in the field of vision, and the sexualized nature of the look. Looking involves desire to see beyond and behind. He discusses how the reaction and rate symbolizes that they're looking and attracted. I see all these ideas that play in your work. I'm always curious to know, inspired by his writing."
Another good question. And this is one I feel like it's like the thing that I get in trouble for. I have these conversations a lot as a teacher. I feel like these are conversations that I have with my students. I I have read Fanon and or worked through Fanon directly with my work. The things, but that's not to say that what the arguments that this theory that he's proposing is not at play. Like it kind of goes back to this question about where desire is within the work. Is like I'm really wholly completely disregarding the viewer's desire, or like I'm just kind of like and that again, it's sometimes it's a little more hard than I mean to. But I'll say the way I think about this element of Fanon in terms of viewer spectator relationship, the work tied to what, like I mentioned Rotimi Fani-Kayode in one of my references. And the reason why that was so important is because of what this sorry, I'm forgetting this other artist's name, what you brought up. I'll just speak directly, which is that, yes, is this like friction happening in my, how do I describe this? When I go to, if I walk into a gallery to see a Robert Wolff exhibition, I'm very aware of being in this space that simultaneous desire and repulsion, activate all of this sort of this entire like bed of racist and anti-Black sort of construction. And so as a viewer, I never feel as an autonomous viewer in relationship to Mapplethorpe's work. I always feel like I collapse in the presence of in white or white viewers into a caged subject. And so Rotimi Fani-Kayode's work and things like this become so important in relation because they find a space, and I sort of find a space in which to react again. Sometimes I'm thinking about all this stuff with like in the larger field, but and when I've made work that is in the visual images playing off of range, it has been those where like my friend Aaron is really pale and much taller than me. And so I use his body in several series of images as this thing that both is the first thing you see against a photograph where the majority of the space is this black velvet and my black body in the camera, but I'll use his body as this thing that seems at first to be the subject of the work, but upon closer inspection is revealed to be the support for which everything else. So he becomes the support that I literally like balancing my camera on his ass as a stabilizing force to make a picture. Like, or these other images where I've played with this misreading of race and it's like interchangeability that happens of presumptions of the Black subject, the fragment of the Black kind of play that. But I've never written any sort of like response directly to Fanon.
Fair enough. I think you've
but that's a really
idea very much without necessarily being you know, the driving force or explicit. Hoda, thank you for that question. I'm going to ask just one final question before we wrap up. It was great to hear you talk about your kind of exhibition making kind of technique. You have specific sizes for display. The exhibition at Photo 2022 for many people in Australia will be their first experience of one of your exhibitions in real life. And just behind the scene, action was actually in a model created in your studio in Los Angeles based on the dimensions of the gallery in a very specific way we will be delivering here in Melbourne. I was wondering what led to your very assured and refined exhibition making decisions that we see in both the the in-store photos that you shared and what's coming to Melbourne. And I guess within that, to what extent did your early exercises in zine making and also making inform that at all?
Ooh. Um, hmm. I hadn't thought about it in terms of going back to zine making, for a place to play, like before there were opportunities for exhibitions, really, a place to see how images would work together. A lot of the first zines were made with outtakes. The idea for the zines was I was shooting these portraits with the idea that, like, you do you sit your friend, or you just subject or place, and you shoot a bunch of stuff and you try to find the right image. And this idea, the zines were a space where sequencing and kind of undoing this idea of like, it's the final image. I was like, what if I make shoot or make? But to really learn some skills from that. But I mean, I think photography is, I don't know, maybe I would just assume that like other mediums don't have this problem, but photography history of like, you send your images off somewhere, and then the curator is the person who decides what scale they'll be and how they'll be printed and how going to be arranged. That's where the meaning is made, and that the images are just sort of this thing that gets sort of like used. And also, for me, which is, this is into much more complicated stuff of this idea of the image in multiple sizes. But by the time I got to this point of my graduate thesis, I was thinking about several particular things in relationship to the photographs. One was I was making these images that people thought were digital constructions because they were like made in the mirror, and at first I was cleaning off the mirror before I realized how amazing the smudges were, and it became this invisible surface. And so they were reading as digital constructions. And I always hold into mind this thing, of working with Mary Kelly, and she always talks about like everything outside and up and including the frame is the foundation for reading the work, so how it's approached. And so in a way in which, first of all, images might be presented, how do I say? That's what led to, at the time, this sort of very particular framing, the like the brown walnut framing was, yes, and in one sense I wanted to kind of like extend myself through it. And it's interesting how that there's, at the time, it was so hard to find someone who would do framing in like a dark brown walnut. 2014, it was really hard to find. And it's been really interesting, and I'm not laying claim to this trend of like contemporary photography being shown like this, but like several well-known friends started framing stuff right afterwards. And now I'm just like, okay, another one of these. But at the time, because these works were, for the most part, at that 34 by 51 scale, it is in the context of contemporary photography, right? It's more in relationship to photography on the scale since the 1980s, which is just kind of like whatever tools are used. So that's why I would pair the presentation of those with these images that were 10 by 19, which is a specific historic album size. And those ones are over matted. And I wanted those, like talking about everything outside and up to the frame, that these images that looked very contemporary, that their presentation would point to a specific moment in early mid 20th century modernist presentation. So you're like, that's the starting point of references. It's not in a sort of like forward-looking future digital space. That's why they're not face mounted on plexi and little thin metal. I wanted them to look old-fashioned, and they looked old-fashioned at first. So that's one thing in terms of like how I was thinking about what images should be together. Then there's also the idea of scale. So like I mentioned in those first installation views, oftentimes those mirror studies or a portrait or something else on the surface of the mirror, I wanted those 34 by 51s to almost be sort of like an extraction of one thing from the studio space to another. Then there's the small album size images in reference to these historic moments where they're moving between the portfolio and the wall and the album and back and forth. And then the largest, which were 80 by 60 at the time, or now somebody who's in those, the camera itself and apparatus approaches a one-to-one relationship, but at the viewing scale where like if you were to stand about 5 feet away from a camera and tripod, it's about the scale that the device would, that the apparatus would be. So in those, I wanted there to be I wanted there to be a more of a whole relationship to the photograph. So I wanted the project, Original Figures, Ground Studies, and Darkroom Project to work across those things. Foregrounding was the physical implication of the camera, but also have these other works took you to like, oh, all of these elements in the, like Paul Sepuya is responding to like Paul Outerbridge, and you know, and all these things. And then, yeah, and then the model, okay, it just keeps going. The model, it's just like, I think at a certain point, the models are a way to, you know, the timeline of this, I'm not able to go there. It's the middle of the academic year. It's like, you know, if it's something not like a year and a half planned out, it's just so hard to travel these days. So it's just a way to less like if I were able to be there, we would not finalize it in the model. The model would just be used to figure out spatially how many works seem to make sense. And then it might get shifted around in person. This one I spent time like being like, okay, this and this. And sometimes there are sightlines in the images that I'm interested in.
No, that's great. That
Responding to
is
your
a beautiful
question.
place to end, as people will be able to visit this exhibition in just a couple of weeks and experience all that hard work and research and incredible image making in the flesh, as it were. So, Paul, that just leaves me to let people know further that your exhibition for Photo 2022 will be taking place at the Centre for Contemporary Photography from the 29th of April to until the 12th of June at CCP on Saturday 30th at 6 p.m. that everyone is welcome to join us for. A big thank you for CCP for being our exhibition partner for this show, as well as Finney Frames and Henry for making that happen. Well, thank you so much for sharing so openly about your work. It's been wonderful to gain new insights and spend this time.
Thank you so much. Today. Thanks for the invitation, and everything has just been wonderful. So yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Have a beautiful evening in Los Angeles, and hopefully we can host you here in Melbourne sometime soon. Okay. Thank you so much.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.